They thought their actions had no consequences. They were gravely mistaken. Tonight, we present 5 chilling tales of supernatural payback, where every wrong deed meets its own, uniquely unsettling fate. If you believe some scores must be settled, show your support with a like and subscribe for more dark justice. There are certain places in the wild where the veil feels thin, where old woods hold onto legends as tightly as ancient oaks hold onto their roots. Sunken Hollow was one such place, a protected forest preserve where local folklore spoke of the ghost heart, a magnificent old stag, almost mythical in stature. They said its coat was the color of winter mist, and its antlers were so vast they seemed to catch the starlight. It was revered, a living spirit of the woods, a creature to be respected, not hunted. Elias Thorne had no respect for such things. He was a hunter of considerable skill, but his pride had long ago curdled into arrogance, his respect for nature replaced by a conqueror's greed. He was a poacher, operating in the shadows of protected lands, seeking not sustenance, but trophies to feed his ego. The legend of the ghost heart was to him not a cautionary tale, but an irresistible challenge, the ultimate prize. Dismissing the warnings of locals as sentimental nonsense, Thorne ventured deep into the forbidden heart of Sunken Hollow one crisp autumn afternoon. The forest was different here, older, quieter. He tracked the heart for hours, its trail strangely deliberate, almost intelligent, as if it were leading him on a grand tour of its domain before the final act. Finally, in a sun-dappled clearing, he saw it. It was more magnificent than the legends described, its presence regal and profound. For a fleeting moment, even Elias felt a sense of awe. But the feeling was quickly suffocated by his ambition. He raised his rifle. The shot echoed, a violent sacrilege in the hallowed silence. The great heart fell. Thorne felt a surge of cold, triumphant pride as he claimed his prize, the vast, starlit antlers, leaving the rest behind, a quiet testament to his transgression. He returned to Sunken Hollow a week later, seeking lesser game, his ego still soaring. But the woods had changed. The vibrant life he was used to seemed muted, withdrawn. The familiar sounds of the forest were replaced by an unnerving, watchful silence. He pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to his own heightened senses after the significant hunt. But then he heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of hoofbeats on damp earth, always just behind him, always just out of sight. When he'd stop to listen, the sound would cease. When he'd move, it would begin again, a phantom echo shadowing his every step. He told himself it was just a deer, skittish and unseen. But the feeling of being followed persisted, a cold weight on his shoulders. The next day, it escalated. As he looked up, tracing the path of a squirrel, he saw it, for just a moment, woven into the tangle of bare branches high above, the silhouette of vast, familiar antlers. He blinked, and it was gone, just branches once more. He began finding his own traps, meticulously set, mysteriously sprung, their steel jaws clamped shut on nothing but air. Sometimes he'd find them not just sprung, but carefully rearranged, the metal traps laid out on the forest floor in strange, unsettling spiral patterns, like a piece of primitive, mocking art. The forest, once his domain of expertise, became a place of frustrating confusion. The animals he tracked now led him on impossible, looping trails that would, more often than not, lead him right back to the very clearing where he had taken the ghost heart. The place was marked only by the disturbed earth, yet it felt like the hub of all the wood's new, strange energy. Elias Thorne's legendary skill, his poacher's luck, deserted him completely. His confidence, once as solid as oak, began to splinter. He grew jumpy, irritable, his nights filled with dreams of running through an endless forest, the sound of hoofbeats always just behind him, a pursuit from which he could never awaken. The woods he had once mastered now felt alien, hostile. He was no longer the predator. He was the quarry. The final straw came during a late-season hunt. He was tracking a fox, his focus absolute, trying to ignore the now constant feeling of being watched. He moved into a small ravine, his eyes on the trail ahead. Suddenly, from the ridge above, a sound, a sharp crack of a large branch, followed by the dislodging of a heavy boulder. It wasn't a natural fall. It felt deliberate. The boulder crashed down the ravine wall, missing him by mere inches, its impact shaking the ground. He looked up, heart pounding, and saw nothing but swaying trees. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was not welcome here. He was being actively driven out. He never returned to Sunken Hollow. He tried to hunt in other lesser woods, but the feeling followed him. The phantom hoofbeats, the whisper of unseen movement, the silhouette of antlers in the periphery of his vision. He could no longer find peace or focus in the wild. The thrill of the hunt, the very thing that had defined him, was replaced by a constant, gnawing dread. The forest, all forests, had become a place of judgment. The revenge of the ghost heart was a masterful, fitting piece of supernatural justice. Its spirit, or perhaps the spirit of the woods itself, did not seek to take Thorne's life in a bloody reprisal. It took something far more precious to him. It took away his purpose, his pride, his identity. It turned the hunter into the haunted, forcing him to live out his days with the same constant, background fear he had once inflicted upon his prey. The silence of the woods was no longer an opportunity for him, but a terrifying reminder that he was being watched, forever pursued by the echo of the great life he had so arrogantly stolen. Childhood treasures are rarely measured in monetary value. Their worth is calculated in love, in memory, and in the boundless imagination of their owner. They can become vessels for so much emotion that they almost seem to possess a life of their own, a quiet loyalty that, if betrayed, can manifest in the most peculiar and unsettling ways. Young Leo was a quiet boy, more at home in the worlds he built in his mind than in the boisterous reality outside. His most prized possession, his confidant and steadfast companion, was a small wooden toy soldier he called the Captain. It had been hand-carved and painted by his late grandfather, a toy maker of modest skill but immense love. The Captain wasn't perfect. His painted-on uniform was a little uneven. One leg was slightly shorter than the other, giving him a permanent dignified lean. But to Leo, he was a hero, a stoic guardian who stood watch on his nightstand every night. Into Leo's quiet world came Catherine, his new stepmother. Catherine was, on the surface, perfectly pleasant, a woman determined to build a new, modern family unit. But beneath her polished exterior, a subtle jealousy took root. She felt like an outsider to the deep, quiet bond between Leo and his father, a bond fortified by memories she wasn't a part of. And the Captain, that shabby, hand-carved soldier, became, in her eyes, a symbol of that past, a stubborn little relic of a life before her. One spring afternoon, in what she would later tell herself was a necessary act of decluttering and moving forward, Catherine made her move. While Leo was at school, she gathered up a bag of old clothes and odds and ends for charity. With a brisk, dismissive motion, she swept the Captain from Leo's nightstand and tossed him into the bag amongst the worn-out sweaters and mismatched socks. She didn't hide him or put him away for safekeeping. She discarded him. When Leo came home and noticed his missing companion, his quiet devastation was palpable, his eyes wide with a silent, heartbroken question that Catherine chose to ignore. A few days later, Catherine was getting ready for an important dinner engagement. She reached into her jewelry box for her favorite pair of delicate pearl earrings, a gift from her own mother. Only one was there. She searched everywhere, her frustration mounting, blaming her own carelessness. The next morning, her husband found the missing earring. It was nestled amongst coffee grounds and eggshells at the very bottom of the kitchen trash bin. Catherine was bewildered, unnerved, but chalked it up to a bizarre, inexplicable accident. But then, the pattern continued, each incident a subtle echo of her own callous act. An important work document she had left on her desk, ready for a presentation, vanished. She found it 2 days later in the outdoor recycling bin, crumpled and stained with something damp. A beautiful silk scarf, a sentimental keepsake, disappeared from her closet. The following weekend, while driving past the community donation center, she saw it, a flash of familiar color hanging limply from the slot of the large metal charity bin, exactly where she had deposited the bag containing the Captain. A cold, creeping paranoia began to set in. Catherine's world, once so ordered and controlled, was becoming a place of small, inexplicable losses. She couldn't explain what was happening without sounding irrational. She began to suspect Leo, but one look at his still sad, withdrawn face made the accusation feel monstrous and cruel, so she kept her suspicions locked away, a bitter secret. The haunting, if one could call it that, was never destructive. Her things weren't broken, only disrespected, lost, discarded. She was being forced to feel the same sense of dismissive loss that she had inflicted upon her new stepson. The culmination came with a piece of jewelry from her husband, a delicate silver locket he had given her on their first anniversary. It was her most cherished modern treasure. One evening, it was gone from its velvet box. She tore the house apart, a frantic, desperate energy overtaking her. As she sat, exhausted and on the verge of tears amidst the mess of her search, a memory surfaced with vivid, unwelcome clarity. The look on Leo's face when he realized the captain was gone. She saw, in her mind's eye, her own hand dropping the small wooden soldier into the donation bag, his painted-on, stoic face disappearing under a pile of old clothes. A chilling realization dawned. This wasn't random chance. This wasn't a mischievous child. This was an echo, a perfect, unnerving, and deeply personal form of retribution. The disrespect she had shown to a child's treasured memory was being mirrored back at her, piece by precious piece. Driven by a new and potent mix of fear and dawning guilt, Catherine grabbed her car keys. She drove frantically to the charity shop, arriving just before it closed. She explained her situation in a rush of panicked words, describing a mistakenly donated bag. With the manager's reluctant permission, she began to sift through the large, overflowing collection bins in the back room. Against all odds, at the bottom of a dusty bin, she found him, the captain, a little scuffed, his paint slightly chipped, but whole. She brought the little wooden soldier home, cleaned him with a soft cloth with a reverence she hadn't known she was capable of. And that night, while Leo was asleep, she placed him back on his nightstand, standing guard once more. She even whispered a quiet, heartfelt apology to the still, silent room. From that day forward, Catherine's prized possessions stopped disappearing. The strange, quiet war of attrition was over. The house settled back into a fragile peace. It was a form of revenge unlike any other, a haunting not by a vengeful specter, but by a sense of loyalty so profound it seemed to imbue an inanimate object with a will of its own. It didn't seek to harm or to terrify with ghostly apparitions. It sought only to teach, to mirror a hurt until it was understood. The captain, imbued with a child's love and a grandfather's legacy, had simply, quietly, and effectively defended his own. Some forms of vengeance are not born of rage, but of a profound and wounded love. They do not shriek or rattle chains. They move with the quiet, inexorable force of order itself, a silent rebellion against a desecration of what was held dear. This is the tale of such a quiet revenge, orchestrated by the lingering spirit of a forgotten librarian. The Oak Hollow Public Library was an institution of comforting silence, a sanctuary smelling of old paper, binding glue, and lemon-scented wood polish. For over 40 years, its soul, and its most dedicated custodian had been Mr. Alastair Abernathy. He was a man as quiet and timeless as the volumes he curated, with silver-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose, and an encyclopedic knowledge of every book, its history, and its precise place upon the shelves. He didn't just work at the library. He was a part of its very foundation, a gentle guardian of its peace. Then came Ms. Evelyn Sterling. Hired by the city board, she was the new library director, a woman armed with an MBA, a portfolio of aggressive modernization plans, and a brisk, dismissive attitude toward anything she deemed inefficient. She saw the library not as a sanctuary, but as an underperforming asset. Books, to her, were data units, and the hushed reverence Mr. Abernathy had cultivated was, in her view, an outdated obstacle to community engagement and revenue-generating workshops. She immediately clashed with Mr. Abernathy's quiet, traditional methods. Within 2 months, citing his resistance to progress, she forced him into an unceremonious and early retirement. He didn't fight. He simply packed his few personal belongings, gave a final, lingering look at the reading room he loved, and walked out the heavy oak doors for the last time. Stripped of his life's work, his purpose, and the quiet world that had sustained him, Mr. Abernathy seemed to shrink, fading into a quiet obscurity. He passed away just a few months later, his passing marked only by a small notice in the local paper. With Mr. Abernathy gone, Ms. Sterling began her grand overhaul. Her first act was to install a new, state-of-the-art public address system intended for loud, cheerful announcements about coffee mornings and coding workshops to replace what she called the inefficiency of quiet. The day it was installed, she stepped up to the main desk microphone with a triumphant smile, ready to deliver her first big announcement. She pressed the button and spoke. Absolute, profound silence emanated from the dozens of new speakers throughout the library. She tried again. Nothing. The IT technician was baffled. Diagnostics showed the system was working perfectly. But as Ms. Sterling fumed, the old, gentle chime bell that Mr. Abernathy had always used to signal closing time, long since disconnected, rang out a single, clear, resonant note from its place on the wall. This was the beginning of the library's quiet rebellion. Ms. Sterling's ambitious projects began to be plagued by inexplicable, orderly chaos. Important digital files for her renovation plans, spreadsheets, contractor agreements, architectural renderings would vanish from their designated folders on the shared server. They weren't deleted. The IT team confirmed that. Instead, they would be found days later, inexplicably renamed, with complex, archaic Dewey Decimal System codes, and reshelved into obscure deep server directories related to historical archiving, or, in one particularly galling instance, a folder labeled Obsolete Methodologies. The second phase of her plan involved replacing the beloved wooden card catalog with a new high-tech barcode scanning system. The massive catalog was to be dismantled and discarded, but the scanners, once installed, refused to cooperate. They would beep with an error message, unable to read the barcodes on the books. Yet more than once, a frustrated librarian would turn away from the malfunctioning scanner, only to hear a soft, dry scrape of wood on wood. One of the drawers of the old, decommissioned card catalog nearby would be mysteriously slid open just an inch, revealing the perfectly preserved, hand-typed card for the very book they were trying to scan. Ms. Sterling's own composure began to fray. Her loud, important business calls in her glass-walled office were often interrupted by a sharp, clear, and very distinct shh that seemed to come from right behind her, though she was always alone. When she spoke too loudly in the main reading room, the sound would echo from the high, vaulted ceiling, a ghostly admonishment for her disruption of the peace. Her grand plans fell further and further behind schedule. The city board grew impatient. Her staff, bewildered by the glitches and unnerved by her increasingly frantic and accusatory demeanor, began to lose faith. She felt a constant, quiet, judgmental presence, an atmosphere of deep disapproval that she couldn't articulate but felt in her very bones. She tried to have the old card catalog removed entirely, but the movers reported it was inexplicably, impossibly heavy, as if bolted to the floor of the building itself. The final act of Mr. Abernathy's silent revenge came during Ms. Sterling's big presentation to the city board, a last-ditch effort to secure more funding for her failing chaotic project. She had her entire presentation on a sleek, modern laptop. As she stood before the board, ready to begin, she clicked to open the file. It was gone, not moved, not renamed, simply vanished from the device. A cold panic seized her. In her desperation, she looked up at the faces of the board members, a plea forming on her lips. And there, reflected faintly in the glass of the large bookcase behind the chairman, she saw him. The translucent, sorrowful face of Alistair Abernathy, his silver-rimmed spectacles glinting. He was not angry, merely disappointed. He slowly raised a single finger to his spectral lips in a final, undeniable, and utterly silent shh. Evelyn Sterling's project was cancelled the following week. She resigned in disgrace, defeated by an opponent she could neither comprehend nor command. The library, after her departure, slowly returned to its former state. The strange occurrences ceased. The new PA system was never used, and a quiet respect for the silence of the stacks was reinstated by the staff. Mr. Abernathy's revenge was not one of fury. It was a rebellion of quiet order, a defense of peace. He hadn't sought to destroy the library he loved. He had simply, methodically, and supernaturally protected its soul. His spirit, forever bound to the place that had been his life's work, had ensured that the silence and the librarian who cherished it would have the final, unspoken word. Retribution in our modern age does not always come in the form of a spectral apparition or a chilling whisper in a dusty hall. Sometimes it is colder, more precise. Sometimes the ghost is not a soul, but an idea, an echo of brilliance embedded in lines of code and currents of electricity, waiting patiently within the walls of a stolen dream to enact its own unique form of justice. Anna Reed was a junior architect, but she possessed a mind that saw buildings not as static structures, but as living, breathing ecosystems. Her passion was for sustainable, intuitive design. Her magnum opus, a project she had poured years of her young career into, was the blueprint for the Helios building. It was a marvel of eco-innovation, a smart tower designed to work in harmony with its environment, with systems that mimicked natural processes. It was, she often said, a building designed with a conscience. Her senior partner, Julian Croft, had a conscience that was far more flexible. He was a man of immense charisma and ambition, with a reputation for absorbing the credit for his team's successes while deflecting any hint of failure. He saw Anna's Helios design and immediately recognized it not for its environmental genius, but for its potential to win the prestigious Vanguard Award for Architectural Innovation, an accolade he had coveted for years. With the practiced ease of a corporate predator, he praised Anna's work, then systematically marginalized her, absorbing her research, reassigning her to minor projects, until her groundbreaking design was seen by the board as a collaborative effort under his leadership. At the final presentation to the awards committee, he presented a version of the Helios building as his own, slightly altered, with some of Anna's more complex, elegant systems simplified for cost efficiency, but undeniably her creation at its core. He won. The Vanguard Award was his. Anna, watching from the back of the auditorium, felt the cold, sharp sting of betrayal. Faced with the impossibility of challenging a man as powerful as Julian, her passion for the work she loved now tainted, she quietly resigned, her spirit crushed. The Helios building was constructed, a gleaming monument to Julian Croft's supposed genius. It became the jewel of the city's skyline, and Julian's career soared to new heights. For a few months, all was well. Then the glitches began. The building's sophisticated, centralized management system started to behave erratically. The state-of-the-art automated lighting, programmed by Julian to maintain a bright, impressive, and energy-intensive level of illumination at all times, began to dim itself during peak sunlight hours. It wasn't a malfunction. The system logs showed no errors. The building was simply self-regulating, achieving an energy efficiency that far surpassed Julian's projections, as if it were breathing in sync with the sun. The meticulously calibrated HVAC system followed suit. Thermostats, set for standard corporate comfort, would subtly adjust themselves throughout the day, creating gentle, natural airflow by opening and closing automated vents in a complex sequence that baffled the engineers. The building seemed to be creating its own internal weather patterns, mimicking the complex, holistic natural ventilation system from Anna's original, more ambitious design. The advanced water reclamation system, one of the building's key selling points, began operating at nearly 100% efficiency, a level thought impossible by the installation team. It was finding and utilizing pathways, recycling gray water with a precision that didn't seem to exist in the final blueprints Julian had provided. The building's smart glass windows, meant to tint on a simple timer, began to adjust their opacity dynamically in response to the actual angle of the sun, maximizing natural light while minimizing heat gain with an intuitive grace that felt alive. Julian Croft was furious. He blamed faulty software, incompetent technicians, shoddy installation. The building was not behaving as he had designed it. It was defying him. The engineering firm was called in repeatedly. They ran diagnostics, checked every line of code they had access to, and found nothing. The systems weren't just malfunctioning, they were outperforming their own specifications. They were self-optimizing in ways that pointed to a deeper, more integrated, more elegant design logic than the one they had been given to implement. One senior engineer, a man named Chen, was particularly intrigued by the anomaly. Unwilling to accept glitch as an answer, he began to dig deeper, looking for the ghost in the machine. He delved into the firm's deep server archives, searching for the initial design submission files, a digital archaeology of the project's origins. And there he found it. A collection of files, time-stamped months before Julian's final version, under a junior architect's name, Anna Reed. Her original blueprints were there, more detailed, more complex. Her system logic files were there, outlining the very benevolent malfunctions the building was now enacting. The glitches weren't errors at all. They were the building's core programming, the echo of its true creator's intent, fighting to reassert itself against the cruder, less efficient modifications Julian had made. The building was trying to heal itself, to become what it was always meant to be. Chen's discovery led to a quiet, then a very public, internal investigation. The evidence was irrefutable, logged and time-stamped in the digital ether. Julian Croft's celebrated genius was revealed to be calculated theft. The Vanguard Award was rescinded amidst a storm of scandal, and his once stellar career was left in ruins. The revenge in this story had no spectral figures or chilling whispers. It was a modern haunting, a digital retribution. Anna Reed's brilliant, compassionate vision, imbued into the very logic of the steel and glass, refused to be silenced. It lived on as a ghost in the machine, a silent, efficient, and undeniable force that worked tirelessly not to destroy, but to correct. It was the perfect poetic justice for a crime of the modern age, proving that a stolen idea, if it is powerful enough, can find its own way to reveal the truth and, in doing so, vindicate its one true creator. They say that the finest wines are not merely grown, but crafted with a piece of the vintner's very soul. They say the land remembers the touch of a caring hand, and that the grapes themselves can hold the memory of devotion. But what they don't often say is that when such a legacy is betrayed, The wine can remember that too, and its revenge can be the most bitter vintage of all. Crestfall Vineyard was a place of quiet reverence, nestled in a sun-dappled valley. For generations, it was known for one legendary small-batch vintage, Sorrow's End. It was a wine spoken of in hushed, appreciative tones, renowned for a complex, almost ethereal taste that seemed to tell a story on the palate, a story of sun, soil, patience, and profound passion. Its creator was Old Man Anselm, the last of his line, a vintner who treated winemaking not as a business, but as a sacred partnership with the land. He poured his life, his very essence, into every bottle of Sorrow's End. When Anselm passed away, the vineyard and the celebrated name of its wine fell to his only heir, his nephew, Marcus. Marcus was a man of a different vintage entirely. He was slick, pragmatic, and saw the world through the cold lens of a spreadsheet. He had no love for the art, no respect for the land. To him, Sorrow's End was not a legacy to be honored, but a brand to be exploited. His changes were immediate and brutal. He abandoned Anselm's meticulous, time-honored organic methods, replacing them with cheaper, more aggressive agricultural practices. He sourced inferior grapes to supplement his own, prioritizing quantity over the uncompromising quality his uncle had cherished. He ramped up production, flooding the market with a thinly veiled imitation of the real thing, all bottled under the prestigious Sorrow's End label. The first few batches, buoyed by the wine's sterling reputation, sold briskly. Marcus counted his profits with a smug satisfaction. But then the whispers began, not from ghosts in the cellar, but from confused and disappointed connoisseurs. The wine, they reported, was wrong. It wasn't just that it lacked the sublime complexity of Anselm's vintages. Something more unsettling was afoot. Bottles, perfectly fine upon uncorking, seemed to spoil with an unnatural speed, turning within an hour from a passable table wine to something acrid and undrinkable. More disturbingly, a strange, persistent aftertaste was noted by nearly everyone who drank it. It wasn't the simple sourness of a wine gone bad. It was a profound, almost ashen bitterness. A flavor that clung to the palate long after the glass was empty. A taste that critics, struggling for words, described as the flavor of dust and disappointment, or like drinking a memory of a much better time. Then the phenomenon grew stranger, seeping from the palate into the psyche. People who drank Marcus's wine, even just a single glass with dinner, began to report experiencing intensely vivid, melancholic dreams that night. These were not nightmares of monsters or phantoms. They were quiet, personal torments. A businessman would dream of a brilliant opportunity he'd let slip through his fingers years ago. A woman would relive, with painful clarity, the moment a cherished friendship had ended due to her own pride. An artist would dream of their greatest unfinished masterpiece, forever beyond their reach. The wine, it seemed, was psychically imparting upon its drinkers the very essence of Anselm's own heartbreak, the sorrow of a life's work squandered, of beauty corrupted, of a legacy betrayed. The legend of sorrow's end was reborn, but not as Marcus had intended. It became infamous, whispered about not in reverence, but in warning. It was now the wine of regret, the vintner's tears. Distributors began refusing his shipments. Restaurants sent back their cases. The vineyard, once a symbol of prestige, became a financial black hole, hemorrhaging money as its reputation turned to ash. Marcus, in a furious state of denial, refused to believe it. He blamed a conspiracy, sabotage, the mass hysteria of snobbish wine drinkers. To prove everyone wrong, he took a bottle from his latest, most expensive batch one evening, uncorked it, and drank a large glass himself. The initial taste was fine, if unremarkable. There was no immediate bitterness. He felt vindicated. He went to bed that night, his mind already drafting angry letters to his distributors. And then he dreamed. He didn't dream of his own failures. He dreamt of his uncle's. He saw through Anselm's eyes, feeling the old man's despair as he watched Marcus's machines tear through the cherished vines. He felt the crushing weight of a lifetime of devotion being carelessly, callously undone for profit. He tasted, not on his tongue, but in his very soul, the ashen bitterness of a broken heart. He awoke in a cold sweat, the phantom taste of profound sorrow filling his mouth, a taste he could not wash away for days. He was psychologically undone. The experience shattered his cynical pragmatism, forcing him to confront the emotional reality of his betrayal. The vineyard was no longer a source of potential profit, but a monument to his own greed and the quiet, powerful grief of the man he'd disrespected. Marcus sold Crestfall Vineyard for a pittance the following month, desperate to escape the place and its sorrowful vintage. The revenge of old man Anselm was complete. His spirit had not walked the fields as a spectre, nor had it rattled chains in the cellar. His love for his craft, his soul, was so deeply intertwined with the grapes, the soil, the very terroir of Crestfall, that when his legacy was betrayed, the wine itself became the vessel for his heartbreak. It didn't curse or kill. It simply, quietly, and effectively forced the world, and most pointedly his nephew, to taste the profound bitterness of what had been lost, enacting a perfect, poetic, and deeply personal justice.